Current Maine law requires all Maine law enforcement to report missing persons to the Maine office of the chief medical examiner.
A state representative from Blue Hill has proposed a bill that would create a missing persons database through the Maine State Police.
Sierra Whaley has more from the public hearing.
LD 172, an act to require the Maine State Police to create a statewide list of missing persons.
According to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, more than 140 people are missing in Maine, dating back to 1947. However, there's no database to track those individuals.
I would imagine it feels harmful to look at the state police's list of missing persons and not see your loved one who went missing in a place that has a municipal department.
Currently, the Maine State Police missing person website consists of 36 people. According to a Maine State Police lieutenant who testified, that is a list of suspicious missing person investigations. Otherwise, loved ones or community members concerned about missing people have to rely on the National Missing and Unidentified Person System linked through the OCME under the branch of the Attorney General's office website.
The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner continues to be the official repository in Maine for keeping this list because of their obvious connection to the recovery of remains within the state and statutory mandate for reporting to them.
We find that more people do not know anything about him than who do know.
Tammy Locker Scully is the mother of Graham Locker, a Norwich Walk man who went missing from Bangor in 2022. His name is not on the missing persons list through the Maine State Police.
I've been asked multiple times, if he's missing, why isn't he on the state's list? So it calls into question my honesty, my integrity.
Stephanie Dameron, the 14-year-old girl who has been missing from New Sweden since September of 2024, is also not on that list. An office administrator from the OCME says her office is neutral on the bill, but says there are gaps in the system when it comes to communication. She referenced the case of the missing fisherman from South Addison.
We found out through the news that they were missing. Nobody told us. Nobody said a word. And that happens more often than you think.
In the next work session, more will be discussed regarding communications and the addition of personnel to create a potential database through the state. Sierra Whaley, WABI News, Bangor.